Everybody, thanks so much for listening to Fire Breathing Rob. We have a legend coming back on today. If you have listened to us before, please like, subscribe, and share. And if you're not having a good day, you listen to this guy, you'll definitely start having a good day or get a little bit of a laugh out of this. You saw him twice on here, and you'll see him for a third time. This is Noble, and he is with EQ Gangster. If you listen to the podcast, go to Spotify, check it out, Apple Podcasts, and all the rest of the sites. Definitely subscribe, like, and share to his podcast. It talks about, as men and the women that are listening too, we struggle with emotions and really open ourselves up. We saw that through the coronavirus, depression, anxiety. A lot of guys don't really know how to accept themselves and be emotional in general. So that's why we have Noble on the podcast. But today we're kind of going a little different. But before we get into that, Noble, thanks so much, and I'm happy to have you on. And I love EQ Gangster. I just love listening to it. I think it's great what you do.
Thank you, Big Rob. This is awesome seeing you again, bro. It's great to see you, man.
No, but let's start off and talking about being on the battlefield in general. Before we even get into that, can you talk about growing up and what made you want to join the military? I know a lot of people that have had family, they just go in and join, after their families joined in. Was that a case for you, or did you just did on your own?
So good question. So a couple things. One, let me do a disclaimer. So this is how old I am, Big Rob. I know you're spring chicken here, but I'm old school, brother. I'm Eric B. and Rakim old. I'm Run DMC old. I'm Metallica old. I'm Simon and Garfunkel old, bro. So I am old school, man. So I actually got into the military and out of the military when there was no war going on. So I personally have not been in combat. Personally, I have not. Obviously, as an infantry officer in the 82nd Airborne Division, I have done a lot of training and preparation for combat, but I personally have never been. I have a lot of friends that have been in combat, a lot of my classmates. One of my close friends in the military just retired as a full bird colonel, '06 in the military, and he's been deployed 7 times for a total of 5 years, which is mind-boggling if you think about 5 years being married, 2 kids, and the guy has spent 5 years of his 20-some year career overseas in combat. And so it's and I know other buddies of mine that have been deployed 13, 15 different times, which is, again, absolutely mind-boggling. So for me, why I joined or even went to the military, I didn't know. I only had one uncle he's a retired sergeant major from the Army who was in the military, and but that's really the only guy that I knew that was in the military. For me, my mom had sat me down as a junior in high school and said, "Hey, Noble, where do you want to get out of college, or where do you want to go to college?" And I said, "I want to go to the school that's going to challenge me the most in every area. What's going to be the hardest possible experience I can go through mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, academically? I want the hardest thing on the planet." And she said, "Well, you can apply to some Ivy League stuff." I'm like, "Yeah, but that's going to challenge me academically, but not necessarily in those other areas. I want to get challenged in every area." And so I happened to be right, like maybe the next day or day after, happened to be bebopping around town, and I bumped into one of my buddies from high school. He's a grade before me, and he had a high and tight, a military haircut. And I'm like, "Dude, what's up with the hairdo?" And he's like, "Oh, I just finished at this at this place called West Point, United States Military Academy." And I'm like, "Dude, what is that?" And he's like, "Well, they yell at you a bunch and you have to do PT all the time." And I'm like, "Bro, I am sold. How do I do that, man? If they yell at me, tell me stuff about my mom that I never knew. My mom wears combat boots and all this kind of stuff." I'm like, "Dude, I got to go to this place, man. I got to check this out." And he said, "Dude, it's no joke." So I went through the whole application process. 14,000 people apply, 15,000 people apply. We had 1,400 people, cadets, get accepted in my class. So whatever that percentage is, from 15,000 to 1,400, 1,500. And then I graduated with about 900 classmates. So there's still about 300 or 400 that quit since we started, from the start of our freshman year. And so, and the application process, kind of a fun fact. If you ever heard of the book Grit by Angela Duckworth, it's a very, very popular book. the first chapter of the book talks specifically about West Point's application process. And so, which is really, really neat and fascinating to kind of see. So for me, that's how I got in the military. I wanted the hardest experience possible. And then once I was at West Point, I wanted to do the hardest possible experience I could do. So when I heard about Ranger School, that Ranger School is 2 months of sleep deprivation and food deprivation, I'm like, sign me up, man. I want to go through that experience. And then infantry, not a lot of people wanted to go the infantry because it's, you know, it's a suck fest, basically a whole suck fest of being in the infantry. And I'm like, man, sign me up. I want, you know, the hardest leadership experience. And of course that's arguable. Every branch is hard. Every military occupational specialty, every MOS is challenging and difficult, but I wanted personally the hardest experience I could possibly get.
So keep going into this. You know, I know you said you weren't in any type of war, but going into that, you know, I'm sure you've been all over the world as far as that goes. Can you talk about some of the places you've went to?
Sure. So I'm going to give you a couple of neat stories. One is not where I went to, but one guy who came from a place. So I went to, after I did my airborne school and learned how to jump out of airplanes, then I went to a school called Infantry Officer Basic Course with a bunch of other second lieutenants for the Army. And then they also have on occasion some foreign exchange officers. And this guy he was a captain from Eritrea, or you maybe say Eritrea, however you say it. It's right there with Ethiopia. So Ethiopia and Eritrea, they were in a civil war for many, 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 many years. And so this guy, we're doing a PT test, a physical fitness test, and we were on push-ups, and he was getting ready to do his push-ups. And I'm a second lieutenant, and I have done nothing in the Army yet, right? I am wet behind the ears. I have no idea what's going on. And I start talking trash about this captain from Eritrea. And so I'm like, man, this guy, he's skinny guy, like he's old. And at the time, old for me, you know, because I was 21 at the time, 22, he was probably 28 or 30, right? So I'm like, man, this guy's old. He's ancient. This guy looks like he's 85 years old. And so boom, he starts doing his push-ups, and he's literally struggling. It's a 2-minute push-up test to see how many push-ups you can do in 2 minutes. And he is literally struggle bus, bro. 2 minutes into this test, when the time stops, I think he knocked out 3 or 4 push-ups in 2 minutes. And I'm totally talking trash, man. I'm like, this guy, they give us the worst of the worst. This guy's a slacker. I'm talking all this trash about this guy, right? So he gets up from his push-ups. He's kind of bummed out. And I said, his name was Dawit. And I said, Dawit, dude, WTF, man, where are the fajitas? I'm like, bro, why do you suck at push-ups, man? Like, come on. I'm like, bro, I'm about to knock out 100 push-ups right now. Let me show you who's the man. He said, Noble, man. He said, you're right. I feel so bad. He said, man, when I was 11 and I got shot in combat, I lost part of my tricep. When I was 12, I got shot in my calf. I lost part of my calf muscle. When I was 13, I got shot by a 7.62 round, and I lost part of my lat muscle. When I was 14, I got shot in my traps. And I'm like, dude, Rob, I wanted to crawl under the grass, bro. I was like, Dawit, I'm like, dude, I am so, and in the meantime, I haven't fired one bullet in my life, bro. And this guy, I said, Dawit, like, what's going on? He said, dude, he said, Noble, our country has been in combat in civil war with Ethiopia as long as I've been alive. He said, when you're 11 years old in Eritrea, you become a medic because you're not strong enough to carry a rifle yet. By the time our kids are about 13, now they become infantry because now they're strong enough to carry a rifle. He said, I have been in combat so he was 30 at the time. He's like, I've been in combat for 14 or 15 years. And I'm like, I can't even wrap my head around that. So that was one crazy experience from a guy who was in Eritrea. I've also, now, so obviously I didn't go anywhere with that, but I was stationed for a hot minute in Egypt for 6 months in Egypt, playing kind of the cop, the peacekeeping force between Egypt and Israel, because Egypt and Israel were not big fans with each other. And so we were there with 11 other forces that were kind of playing the cops, the referee between Egypt and Israel, to make sure they didn't go to war with each other.
Noble Gibbens here on Fire Breathing Rob. Definitely look him up on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Definitely subscribe and like to his podcast. It's about emotional maturity for men. He talks about anxiety, depression, everything in the kitchen sink. I shouldn't even just say it's just on emotions. But it is EQ Gangster, and definitely check it out on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and whatever podcast thing you listen to. In general, I know there's a freaking 100 million out there, but we'll move forward. So, can you talk about the training for an Army Ranger? I mean, it's extremely intense as being a Ranger. So, can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So let me make it different. So for those in the military, this will make a lot more sense than someone who's not. But so there's a difference between Ranger School, which is a
Yeah.
2-month long school. It's a 68-day long school, and a Ranger unit, Ranger regiment. So there's a Ranger regiment, which is an entire tier 1 unit that are incredibly high speed soldiers, some of the best soldiers in the world. And then Ranger School. So I went to Ranger School, which is a 68-day long school. And then I was stationed in the 82nd Airborne Division. So, but Ranger School, they call it one of the Army's premier leadership schools, which is code for a 2-month long suck fest, is basically what it is. And I also call it the Army's elite weight loss program. I lost 40 to 50 pounds in just 2 months, because you eat twice a day, and you have 5 minutes to eat your meal. So wow. you a total of maybe 10 minutes throughout the day of being able to eat, and you sleep maybe 2 hours to 4 hours a night. That's if you did the mission well. If you didn't do the mission well, you got less and less sleep. You may get an hour sleep. And so there was a couple of nights where we didn't sleep at all. So they intentionally put you through sleep deprivation and food deprivation in chaotic environments to mimic what potentially could be combat. And so to see how you would operate with little to no sleep, with little to no food, can you still operate in chaotic environments with people coming after you, and you still having to do missions and be technically and tactically proficient in austere, chaotic environments? So it's pretty intense experience.
So how did you get through that?
That's a good question. So let me think. No, because my mindset going in was, this is one of the sayings that you get, because when you graduate from Ranger School, they sew a little patch on your uniform. It says Ranger on it. It's a Ranger tab. And one of the things that we would always say is the tab or the slab. So my mindset going in is, I'm going to graduate this school, or I'm going to die trying. So I didn't mind what level of suck fest it was going to be. I was going to have to die before I was going to quit. Quitting was not even an option in the old vocabulary. And I kind of mentally and emotionally prepared myself going in that quitting is not an option. And so for me, my mindset getting through that was, how can I help my buddies through? So when I can, because when I think about me, and this applies to emotional intelligence also, when I think about the times when I am the most stressed, I have the most fear, and I have the most anxiety, who am I thinking about the most? Me. But if I can think about you, how can I help Rob through this school? How can I help him make it through this school? And how can I help him graduate? Now I'm not thinking about me. And so for me, that was one of the ways that helped me get through that. Here's another cheesy quote. The more you serve others, the smaller your problems get. the more you serve others, the smaller your problems get. So the more I could focus on helping out my buddies, the less I thought about myself. And that was a tool or technique that I used to help me get through it, which I think is still relevant, very relevant today, that same kind of concept.
You know, I'm sure you saw some crazy stuff. Can you go into elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I'll give you one. This was not in Egypt, but I'll give you one.
Okay.
One of my. So again, I was stationed at Fort Bragg in the 82nd Airborne Division, and Fort Bragg
Yeah.
and the 82nd Airborne Division specifically, the way we get to work in the 82nd is jump out of airplanes. Some people drive, some people ride a bike, some people take their e-bikes, little green bikes, whatever. We jumped out of airplanes to get to work. And so one of my roles in the 82nd was something called the Brigade Air. So it's the guy responsible for coordinating all of the aircraft for all the jumps in my unit, in my brigade. So for 1,000 plus soldiers, I was the guy that coordinated the aircraft to make sure all their people, personnel, and equipment got to the drop zone. One of the times that I was the brigade air for one of the missions that I had set up or organized, help organize, one of my buddies, actually, he was a fellow lieutenant, and he was a smaller guy, did not weigh a whole lot, was not super tall. One of the aircraft that he jumped out of, what happened was one of his straps on his rucksack got caught on the door of the aircraft. It's actually called an aileron for a C-130. It got caught, wrapped around this piece of equipment at the door of the aircraft.
Yeah.
That when he jumped out, he got stuck on the aircraft, and he slammed the bottom of the airplane. So he was slamming on the bottom of the airplane while we're at 1,000 feet in the air. And fortunately, the safety, he's the guy that's at the door making sure everything happens safely, saw this, that he didn't end up making it all the way out of the aircraft because he heard the thudding. So he goes, sees the strap that got caught, and was able to cut him away from the airplane so that he could fall, his parachute could expand, and he could land on the ground. He landed on the ground unconscious because of getting slammed on the aircraft so many times. Fortunately, he was okay. There was another time when I was a brigade air where one of the soldiers jumped out of the airplane, and his main static line that is attached to the aircraft, to his parachute, actually snapped, which is not a good thing. That is a major emergency malfunction. And what ended up happening is he did not pull his reserve parachute in time, because you're only in the air, because we're only jumping out at about 1,000 feet. He ended up hitting the ground without pulling his reserve. So he died, unfortunately. So, and then another guy, another scenario. So we train with live rounds during certain parts of our training. And there was a scenario where we had to take this objective, and there's what's called concertina wire, barbed wire. It's bundles of barbed wire, and we have to breach that barbed wire meaning we have to go over and through that barbed wire so that we can get onto the objective. Well, in order to do that, there's a lot of moving parts to do that. The first guys to that concertina wire, there's something called, they didn't have other equipment, so they had to do what's called a body breach, which means a couple soldiers lay across that barbed wire so that other soldiers can run across their bodies and run through that depressed, smashed barbed wire so that they can get onto the objective and take out the bad guy. Well, while that is happening, there is something called support by fire. So there's machine guns that are suppressing the enemy objective while these guys are breaching the wire. Well, in one training scenario that happened with live rounds, one of the guys that was breaching the barbed wire, the concertina wire, actually got shot by friendly fire by one of the guys who was providing support by fire. And so he ended up getting killed as well, because they got their sectors of fire were messed up while the friendly guys were going across, breaching that wire. So that's another real kind of terrible scenario when that kind of thing happens.
So when did you get out, by the way?
I got out in 2001. So I got out before September 11th even happened.
But what is your take on Afghanistan and how we got out?
So I think it was a train wreck. And I agree with you that I think that it's not like we can stay in Afghanistan for now until kingdom come, right? I think we had to get out of there at some point. How they left was an absolute train wreck.
Do you think there was just to push back on that? Do you think that there was this military we heard this as a student of history. I always go back to the military industrial complex. Dwight D. Eisenhower talked about this as president of the United States back in the 50s, about how there's so much power and there's people behind the scenes pulling the triggers. Even President Trump spoke about this when he was president. And I truly agree with that. I believe in that, what they both said, those two presidents. Do you believe that there was people behind the scenes that wanted that money that you stated earlier, that wanted that power, that wanted Afghanistan to just go on for 100 years? They didn't give a damn how many guys died, how many guys lost limbs. They were making that money hand over fist, and they couldn't give a damn of what happened. Do you think that there was people behind the scenes that were trying to get Biden to stay, and then when Biden said he didn't want to stay, that were trying to say, well, let's try to screw him and play that? I'm not a huge Biden guy personally. I think that we needed to get out of there, like you said too. And I thought there was some tragic things that did happen, but again, we needed to pull the trigger.
So here's some information that I got from somebody that was there very, very recently.
Sure.
And he said, Nobel, we had the exit plan and exit strategy already done and ready to go by January 1st. We were ready to start making that transition happen. Our green suiters, we call them green suiters, our chain of command, our military was not allowed to begin that process until the train wreck happened. We had five or 6 months.
Hold on. What do you mean by the train wreck?
Meaning, so when we pulled out and 11 days later the Taliban took over and we left thousands and thousands of people, we don't ever, the military doesn't ever bounce from an area and leave civilians there, right? American civilians and stuff there. The military is always the last people to leave, always. Mm-hmm. There's never been a scenario where you leave the American citizens there and the military flies out and say deuces. That's never.
But just going back, because you said January 1st. So I'm going back to January 1st. So this is and then you said they couldn't leave because of the train wreck. Are you talking about go ahead.
The military was not able to begin the exit plan until the train, they were not allowed, the military was not allowed to implement their exit plan to start getting people out of the country until somebody above the military said, okay, now go, and leaving a whole bunch of American citizens. There were private citizens that had to go in and get thousands of people out on their own with private funds. That should be again, the government has never done, the military has never done that. We've never left a country with civilians back.
Well, whose fault is this then?
That's way above my pay grade. I just know my military buddy said that as a military guy, they were not allowed to begin that whole exit strategy back in January because higher ups were not allowing the military to start that process.
When you say higher ups, January 1st, Trump was still in office. Are you saying that it was somebody from his administration? Are you talking about a general, or you don't know?
I have no idea. My obviously Joe civilian, very limited understanding would be that the politicians who were making the call, never allowed that process to happen. And why on earth the current administration did not allow this stuff to start happening months and months and months ago is beyond me. I don't get it. I have no idea.
The way you're referring to this, from what your buddy said, seems like that was somebody either in the last administration, or it was a military, a general, or someone else that didn't pull the trigger on that. Because if you're saying January, that's still the Trump administration, so it'd either be his administration or a general.
Well, but January 20th
was Biden, yeah.
Right. So it doesn't matter what Trump said.
It depends the date, right?
But it does. I mean, it doesn't matter like what Trump said, May or June or July, or doesn't matter, because the current administration, for whatever reason, did not allow the military guys to begin that exfiltration process to start until recently,
August. Yeah.
And they had the plan back in January to start that process in January, but for whatever reason they said, okay, go now, make it happen. And again, the military leaves the country before getting all the civilians out, which again is mind-boggling. And then why the military didn't, again, it does not make any sense to me why the military left American civilians. There's no scenario that anyone can tell me that makes sense. It just makes no sense to me. So much so that, again, private citizens, I'm sure you've heard about the Pineapple Express, right? The Pineapple Express guys, all these special operations guys got together, private jets, all these private donors, to go rescue American citizens. Why on earth are they having to do that rather than our own military and government? It makes no sense to me. And then to have those soldiers die, those 13 soldiers die.
Yeah.
And they reported on it for 5 minutes, and Biden's talking about masks and unvaccinated again. Like it didn't even happen, checking his watch 5 times, during this, like, dude, like, it's mind-boggling to me. It's just I don't get it, dude. I just don't get it.
What I was told that the administration got out over 160,000 people. Now, is that true? Is there something else that's going on there? Was there more people? I'm just trying to figure out what you're saying here.
In terms of getting them out of the country?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know how many they got out of the country. I just know they left a bunch of people, but after they left.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I
have no idea. I don't know if it's 10 million or 200,000. For me, it doesn't matter. They left a truckload of American citizens behind, and that makes zero sense to me. There's no, and I don't care who the current administration is.
I agree. Yeah.
The fact that they're leaving American citizens behind makes no sense to me. No sense to me.
Yeah. We'll end with that, Noble. And I appreciate your time today. And thanks so much for being honest about this. Again, if you want to find Noble, definitely go to EQ Gangster. It is on Apple Podcasts and also Spotify. Give him a 5-star review. and also subscribe. If you're listening to us, definitely subscribe on YouTube to us and all the other podcast sites. Anything you want to leave us with, Noble, before you go?
Yes, you rock like ZZ Top, bro, which is way before your days. But I totally appreciate you, Rob. And thanks. I tell you this, man, thank you for just being interested in our country. Thank you for being interested in our military and the history. I really appreciate that. I appreciate that, man. So thank you for your time, and thanks for letting me be on again, brother. You are the bee's knees, bro.
Well, I'll end with that. And again, thank you for fighting for our country and being a veteran. And anybody that is listening, thank you for your service. If you did serve our country or any of our allies that are listening, uh, we thank you for that too. But